Welcome to Medmarc's Risk Management webinar series. I am Heather Thompson, Director of Internet Marketing for Medmarc. I'm so pleased to kick off today's presentation titled Ripped from the Headlines, a Year in Review with our very own risk management team members, Klaus and Zuhal Reed. Klaus, author of Life Sciences Guidebook, An Introduction to FDA Regulation and a Framework for its Successful Navigation, focuses on legal matters faced by participants in the life sciences industry, specifically FDA regulatory compliance. She brings her prior experience in navigating the FDA landscape to Medmarc, where she works with colleagues in-house as well as with policyholders in developing and strengthening regulatory compliance strategies in an effort to mitigate products liability losses. This Klaus is a graduate of the Catholic University of America, Columbus School of Law, and the College of the Holy Cross. Zuhal Reed joined the risk management team in March of 2021. Ms. Reed came to us from Schaub, Amity, Citron, and Sprague, LLP, a healthcare-centric law firm located in New York City, where she worked on healthcare professional liability litigation. Prior to that, Zuhal interned with Intermountain Healthcare, where she advised the hospital system on compliance and risk management matters. Ms. Reed is a graduate of the University of Utah S.J. Quinney College of Law, Salt Lake City, and the University of Toronto, Ontario, Canada, with an honors Bachelor of Science in Human Biology and honors Bachelor of Arts in English Literature. With that, I'm pleased to turn it over to Kate, who will begin today's presentation.
Thanks, Heather. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this year's Ripped from the Headlines episode, as we like to call it. The life sciences industry is a complicated and dynamic industry, and to serve our clients well, we need to stay on top of a rapidly changing landscape. So Zuhal and I have identified a few topics that have been making news in the life sciences industry, and we're going to break down what is happening and what that might mean for products liability. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Zuhal to get us started.
Hello. Our first topic is artificial intelligence. Now, the use of artificial intelligence, and more specifically, using artificial intelligence and machine learning-based software as a medical device, has been steadily on the rise. With this rise in the use of AI ML-based software as a medical device, we can anticipate new products liability issues. The promise of artificial intelligence revolutionizing the medical device industry has not entirely come to fruition. However, that has not dampened the enthusiasm nor the investments. As you can see from the article headlines I've posted up, the FDA has been receiving record numbers of applications in the field of cardiovascular medicine. This increase in the number of applications will likely translate into an increased number of medical devices on the market in upcoming years that use artificial intelligence. An increase in the number of devices will likely also mean an increase in products liability cases dealing with AI and ML-based software as a medical device. Now, it is not the artificial intelligence per se that will be at issue in products liability cases, but rather the machine learning aspect of it. As these devices are exposed to more and more patients, they will gather increased data and they will alter their own algorithm to reflect inputted information more accurately. Now, this can be difficult to deal with in litigation because the product that was approved is not necessarily the product that may have caused the injury. But these issues have not slowed down the belief that using algorithms and software to interpret and understand complex data is the way of the future. In fact, investment into AI-driven cardiology products has seen significant activity in recent years, with over 151 deals involving AI in the cardiovascular devices market since 2020. Cardiovascular devices using AI hit an all-time high last year, with deals totaling nearly $1.6 billion. In fact, 2 months ago, Cornell University announced the launch of the Cardiovascular AI Initiative, which is a $15 million collaboration with New York Presbyterian Hospital that aims to use AI and machine learning techniques to inform heart failure treatment and prevention strategies. Now, rather than functioning as a standalone device that eliminates the need for physicians, AI ML-based software as a medical device has come to be used more effectively as a tool for physicians to enhance their own decision-making through data analysis output provided by the software. For example, AI algorithms have been able to detect cardiovascular abnormalities and to determine patient risk for chronic conditions like heart failure, thereby reducing the time required for diagnosis and saving precious time that a patient might now have for treatment. This will certainly impact both products liability and medical malpractice. From a medical malpractice and products liability standpoint, the learned intermediary doctrine will very much continue to be applicable, since the doctor's actions will be a key component as they're the caregiver making the final decision based on the available information. We will continue to ask the question, would another physician practicing in the same vicinity and the same area of medicine have made the same decision based on the information available? Now, from a purely products liability standpoint, we focus on what I just called the available information. This will be the information given to the doctor by the AI ML-based software as a medical device. If that information is incorrect or faulty in some way due to an issue with the software or the algorithm being used, this will cause an inevitable shift in liability. Nonetheless, we will continue to see this back and forth between medical malpractice and products liability as we see a rise in approved devices using artificial intelligence.
And next up, we are going to talk a little bit about over-the-counter drug reform. There have been some major changes that have occurred over the last couple of years for over-the-counter or OTC drugs. But first, let's review where we started. OTC drugs are most commonly ingested or topically applied products that interact with the body chemically to achieve a therapeutic effect. Where OTCs differ from prescription drugs is that they're typically limited to conditions that are easily self-diagnosable and self-limiting. OTCs frequently manage symptoms that are associated with minor illnesses or conditions that are likely to resolve on their own. OTCs are regulated under a monograph system. It's a series of documents that outlines the conditions for marketing. Each monograph identifies a particular condition that is suitable for over-the-counter drug management, and then sets out a series of permitted active ingredients and the dosage or concentration for each active ingredient, as well as all of the labeling information that is required. And as long as a manufacturer complies with the terms set out in the monograph, then they can proceed directly to market without any FDA pre-approval. We've all seen the drug facts panel, and all of the information that's here comes directly from FDA's regulations. It's everything from the active ingredient and the amount, the purpose, the warnings and the hazards that need to be disclosed, the directions for how to take the product, as well as everything down to like the size of the type in the chart and the width of the bars. All of that is prescribed in FDA's regulations. The problem with the monograph system was that it had been antiquated for decades. It relied on notice and comment rulemaking, with any new monograph or changes to existing monographs having to be published in tentative form in the Federal Register, allowing time for public comment, and then in theory, having FDA take all of those public comments back, adjust the final document, and then publish it again in final form, and have it be codified. However, this system rarely functioned as intended. It took years to finalize monographs, and many sat in tentative form for decades. This hampered FDA's ability to address safety issues, and it also hindered innovation, with most of the over-the-counter drugs in the monograph system containing actives that existed in the early 70s. Industry and FDA alike have been pushing for reform for years, but it was dependent on congressional action. There was regular speculation about which must-pass bill the over-the-counter drug reform could be tacked onto. It was usually seen around user fee reauthorizations. And finally, it was with the urgent need to pass COVID relief legislation that the OTC reform package found its vehicle in the CARES Act. The reform package introduced a couple of critical changes. First, it replaced notice and comment rulemaking with an administrative order process. This put the pace of monograph issuance and any changes in FDA's hands, with the added benefit of giving them a time clock to keep those timeframes reasonable. Second, it allows FDA to assess user fees from over-the-counter drug manufacturers and contract manufacturers to fund the staffing expansion that's necessary to meet the demands of any of the new procedures. So where do we stand right now? Well, we have a number of finalized monographs, some that had been in tentative form for, no exaggeration, my entire life. There's also a new streamlined approach to getting new over-the-counter drugs to the market. Any sponsor who wishes to bring a new OTC drug to market can request a meeting with FDA, discuss any information FDA needs to be confident that the drug can be safely used, safely selected by the consumer. And on the horizon, we may see an easier way to move drugs from a prescription status to over-the-counter status. FDA introduced a proposed rule earlier this year for an additional condition for non-prescription use. Basically, whatever tests and studies FDA might need to see to confirm that over-the-counter use would be safe and appropriate. As well as any labeling that would need to be changed for consumer self-selection and safe use. It's only a proposed rule at this time, so we'll have to see what happens. And back over to Zuhal.
All right, our next topic is stem cell therapy. Stem cell therapy has made headlines several times this past year. It has proven to be very promising in the field of biotechnology. It's been especially important in the field of regenerative medicine as stem cells promote the repair response of diseased, dysfunctional, or injured tissue using stem cells or their byproducts. They hold the potential for manifold applications in biotechnology-based next-generation therapeutics. This is one of the many reasons that the stem cell therapy market is projected to reach $558 million by 2027 from $257 million in 2022. Some of the key drivers of the stem cell therapy market include the expanding number of clinical trials related to stem cell therapies and the growing number of GMP-certified cell therapy production facilities. The ethical concerns related to the use of embryonic stem cells are being increasingly tempered by the use of adult stem cells, like bone marrow cells and induced pluripotent stem cells, which are just regular somatic cells that have been driven backwards into an undifferentiated state through the exposure of pluripotency factors. So, based on therapeutic application, the global stem cell therapy market is segmented into musculoskeletal disorders, wounds and injuries, cardiovascular diseases, surgeries, inflammatory and autoimmune diseases, neurological diseases, and other therapeutic applications. In 2021, the musculoskeletal disorders application segment accounted for the largest share of the stem cell therapy market. Increasing market availability of stem cell-based therapeutic products across major markets is driving the growth of this segment. But with this increased availability, we also have increased liability exposure and the need to ensure that facilities are up to code, the stem cell products and byproducts are going through the appropriate channels for FDA approval, and that correct drug claims are being made. In a surprising win for stem cell clinics, on August 31st, a federal judge in Riverside declared a California stem cell treatment firm to be exempt from FDA regulations, opening the door to the further proliferation of clinics offering therapies the FDA says are scientifically unproven and potentially dangerous. The judge in this case stated that the defendants are engaged in the practice of medicine and not, in fact, in the manufacturing of pharmaceuticals. The FDA will very likely appeal this ruling to protect their regulatory campaign, and because it conflicts with federal court rulings in nearly identical cases the FDA has brought elsewhere. In trying to combat unauthorized use of stem cell therapies, the FDA has written hundreds of letters warning stem cell clinics that they're violating the law and has pursued some in court. In fact, after issuing regulations in 2017, declaring that treatments using unproven stem cell therapies were illegal, the FDA suspended its enforcement for more than 3 years to give clinic operators time to comply with FDA rules. With that said, there's a lot of gray area when it comes to stem cells and their byproducts, like using a patient's own tissues or minimally manipulated tissues, or using stem cells purely topically for cosmetic reasons. These are all highly contested areas of regulation that are of great interest to stem cell therapy stakeholders, and it will be interesting to see how this all plays out in court. For those interested in this area, it will be important to keep an eye on how the regulations might change in the near future to perhaps allow for more stem cell clinics to operate with less FDA regulation. All right, over to you, Kate.
All right, thank you. Next, I wanted to touch on emergency use authorizations, EUAs. We have had a fantastic series of webinars presented by attorney John Lin Song. And I would encourage you to go to our website where you can find those archived webinars. But for today, I wanted to cover some of the quick facts about what has been happening at FDA, what the planning looks like, and what industry can expect going forward. The Secretary of Health and Human Services officially declared COVID to be a public health emergency in February of 2020. And in a subsequent declaration in March, he expanded FDA's authority to permit the issuance of emergency use authorizations, referred to as EUAs, or pandemic response products. EUAs were issued for products that had never received FDA clearance or approval, as well as for already commercialized products that added a new COVID-related indication for use. This is how early pandemic demand for PPE and ventilators, COVID tests and vaccines and treatments like monoclonal antibodies, that's how this demand was met without going through the much lengthier standard FDA approval process. But as pandemic response products, the intent was never for these to be marketed indefinitely under their EUA. Once the pandemic subsides, the agency and industry alike need to return to some semblance of ordinary operations. So what does that mean for manufacturers of COVID response products? FDA is well aware of the tremendous upheaval the end of EUAs could bring to the industry. So they've already begun to prepare the industry for the coming changes and what to expect. FDA released 2 draft guidances this spring outlining the agency's current thoughts on the transition out of EUAs. The plan depends on a number of conditions, but generally speaking, it's intended to take place over a 6-month window. I noted before that the Secretary of Health and Human Services made 2 COVID-related declarations. The first was the declaration of the public health emergency, and separately, the second allowed FDA to issue EUAs. Because these were distinct actions, the EUAs do not automatically cease when the public health emergency officially ends. EUAs can outlast the public health emergency. When the transition actually begins is going to depend on a couple of things. It's going to depend on when the public health emergency expires and when FDA's transition guidance is finalized. If the finalized guidance comes after the expiration of the public health emergency, then the guidance document will provide a date that's at least 45 days after the guidance is released to begin the transition period. And the transition itself is a 180-day process. Manufacturers have 90 days to inform FDA of their intentions for any EUA, any life-sustaining or life-supporting devices that are marketed under an EUA, so that the agency will have an idea of what's going to happen to the availability of this critical equipment. What is the national stock level going to look like? Much of the work during the transition will depend on why a product had an EUA. If a product was first marketed under an EUA, then the manufacturer will need to either cease operations or seek clearance or approval for their device under the usual pathway. Existing non-distributed stock will need to be disposed of. If a product received an EUA for a previously off-label indication, so it was something that was already on the market, but they added a COVID indication, then they need to use the transition window to bring all of the labeling back to the cleared, approved format. Otherwise, they're in the same spot as the unmarketed products, where they would need to seek clearance or approval for that indication. Products that have already been distributed do not need to be recalled, but there will be some guidelines. For single-use devices that are non-life-sustaining or life-supporting, they can be consumed. Any reusable, non-life-supporting or life-sustaining product can either have its label restored to the cleared or approved version, or they can publicly provide, the manufacturer can publicly provide a label that discloses that there was no FDA clearance or approval for the device. For life-sustaining and life-supporting devices, it's much the same as the other reusable devices, except in addition to making a label publicly available that states there's no clearance or approval, they would also need to provide hard copies of this disclaimer label to the holders of the devices. And for in vitro diagnostics, they can remain distributed for 2 years or through the expiration date. And it is required that all adverse events will still be reported to FDA. What remains to be seen is what's going to happen in products liability. During the public health emergency, there was broad protection under the PrEP Act, but what's going to happen to reusable devices after the public health emergency is over? We haven't really seen PrEP tested in this way, so a lot remains unknown. And I would recommend that you keep an eye on our webinar schedule. We may have to ask our friend Jordan Lip to continue his excellent PrEP webinar series as we learn more. And his webinars are also available in our inventory of webinars. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Zuhal.
Okay, our next topic is gene therapy. The recent groundbreaking approval for a therapy that can potentially cure a rare blood disorder has been making front page news for the past couple of weeks. Now, the treatment comes at the price of $2.8 million per patient, making it prohibitively expensive for most people. The treatment is made for patients who rely on regular blood transfusions because of a genetic disease called beta thalassemia, which interferes with the production of hemoglobin, a protein in red blood cells that carries oxygen throughout the body. The success in this story illustrates how gene therapy clinical trials, despite their risks, have increased greatly in recent years. However, these one-time treatments promise to correct genetic defects for life. They are million-dollar therapies that are not available widely for public use. When a therapy is not widely available and is only used for a very tiny fragment of the population, it will likely result in less products liability lawsuits related to those therapies. However, it should be noted that these gene therapies are becoming increasingly common, with a gene therapy for muscle wasting disease at a cost of $2.1 million per treatment, and a gene therapy for a rare immune disorder that costs $2.7 million per treatment, receiving FDA approval in recent years. In addition to the product's liability exposure from gene therapy clinical trials, it should be understood that even approved gene therapies can carry their potential risks. For example, to infuse the therapy's genetically modified cells, patients first undergo intensive chemotherapy that effectively wipes out their immune system, which can put them at a higher risk for long-term infertility and cancer. In addition to these inherent risks in gene therapy, there are also risks associated with clinical trials. There is the risk of cancer development, the risk of inserting the gene in the wrong part of the genome. There's the risk of infection from viral vectors, liver toxicity, and the lack of knowledge and training in the healthcare community that could become warning defect and failure to instruct claims. The most pressing of these risks is the risk associated with gene therapy clinical trials. The FDA held an advisory committee meeting a year ago to discuss safety risks of gene therapies and has continued to struggle with this new developing area of medical biotechnology. With the number of gene therapy submissions on the rise for early consultation ahead of human testing, the FDA has flagged safety concerns ranging from liver toxicity to kidney injury to loss of neurons. During the meeting, several approaches were discussed for tackling safety concerns, such as the use of dogs as the best preclinical models for future trials, given the average 10-year lifespan of the animal and their similarity to humans, and other suggestions like a more formal risk assessment for patients prior to clinical trials commencing. So far, the FDA has released a few different draft guidance documents to aid the biotech industry in their gene therapy submissions. However, there continues to be a rather large gray area with regards to gene therapy and human clinical trials that may provide leniency for biotechnology companies, but it also creates potential legal exposures unique to the type of diseases being treated and the particular gene therapy method. With that said, gene therapy clinical trials are not a one-size-fits-all. They each have their very unique risks associated with them, and they will require specialized knowledge in assessing their unique risk profile before proceeding. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to you, Kate.
All right, our next topic is health equity. The health of any one person is dynamic and it's impacted by many factors, including genetics, lifestyle, environmental factors. It's a combination of physical health and mental health. It's complex and it is unique to each individual. Because clinical trials are intended to assess the safety and effectiveness of a therapeutic product for the population in general, it is critical that the pool of clinical trial subjects reflect our society as a whole, but that is not often the case. Clinical trials have an abysmal record when it comes to subject diversity. In a 2021 FDA study, 75% of 32,000 clinical trial subjects were white. Only 11% were Hispanic, 8% Black, 6% Asian, which does not reflect the actual population of the US at all. Additionally, women have historically been disadvantaged because of both the ethical and legal concerns regarding how an investigational product could impact a pregnant woman or the reproductive system. People of color have also rightfully had a significant distrust in medical research, inhibiting the ability to recruit a reflective subject population. And socioeconomic diversity is also a massive hindrance to sponsors' ability to recruit subjects that reflect society. If a person is without health insurance, they may postpone seeking care until they're too sick to be included in a trial. They may not have access to major academic medical centers where clinical trials are frequently conducted. If someone works an hourly job, they may not have the flexibility to be able to attend the various monitoring appointments that are associated with participating in a clinical trial. But if products are tested on only a small subset of the population, we may have major knowledge gaps. Clinical trials establish effective dosage ranges. So what if genetic differences cause a subset of the population to metabolize a drug differently? But because this population is not sufficiently, because this study subject population is not sufficiently diverse for this difference to be recognized as statistically significant, it's never known, and then people are inadequately treated with this product should it come to market. At what point is the plaintiff's bar going to say, you should have known, but your clinical trial was insufficient and you failed to warn me? FDA is putting policies in place to direct focus to this critical safety issue. They have created the Office of Minority Health and Health Equity, and they have introduced recommendations regarding diversity in clinical trial subject recruitment. They've advised clinical trial sponsors to submit their diversity plan as early as possible in the clinical trial development process. And if the sponsors fail to hit their diversity target without justification, FDA may request post-market studies or post-market surveillance to make up for this deficiency in the clinical trial. There has also been interesting legislation introduced in the House Energy and Commerce Committee by Congresswoman Eshua, California. It's technically bipartisan. It has one Republican among the 15 co-sponsors. So it may have a chance of going forward. And if it were to become law, it would give FDA some teeth with regard to making its subject diversity plan mandatory. In its current state, FDA does not really have anything to back up their recommendations that these plans be submitted, other than industry's sort of desire to appease FDA's recommendations. So this would actually give them some authority to back up these recommendations and maybe improve sponsor compliance. And with that, I will turn it back to Zuhal.
All right, our next topic is supply chain shortages. The COVID-19 pandemic brought a lot of different issues to light. Chief among those was the fragility of the pharmaceutical supply chain and how even small disruptions could lead to disastrous drug shortages. At Medmarc, we've kept a close eye on the government's response to shortages during the pandemic and the actions taken to ameliorate the problem. One measure was the enactment of the Coronavirus Aid Relief and Economic Security Act, or the CARES Act, that was passed in March 2020. The CARES Act was intended to provide relief in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. This act modified the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act, the FDNC Act, and created certain provisions imposing new obligations on some manufacturers, which prompted the FDA to release a 21-page draft guidance document in May 2022 titled Risk Management Plans to Mitigate the Potential for Drug Shortages. The comment period for this draft guidance recently closed July 19th, 2022, and companies affected by the addition of Section 506CJ of the FDNC Act should certainly review the guidance to ensure that they are complying with the requirement for a risk management plan. This guidance document applies to drug manufacturers and those manufacturing active pharmaceutical ingredients. It spells out the requirements for the creation of risk management plans for certain products. Note that implementing compliant risk management plans is an incredibly resource-intensive effort that requires specialized expertise. Per the guidance document, risk management plans will be required for prescription drug products that are life-supporting, life-sustaining, or intended for use in the prevention or treatment of a debilitating disease or condition. Any drug that is critical to the public health during a public health emergency declared by the Secretary under Section 319 of the Public Health Service Act. Any pharmaceutical ingredient included in the prescription drug products I just mentioned, and any associated medical device used for preparation or administration included with the prescription drug products I just mentioned. The document continues with a long list of products for which risk management plans are recommended but not required. The FDA then goes on to define primary, secondary, and other stakeholders within the draft guidance to aid manufacturers in understanding their potential obligations. In particular, they define the term other stakeholders very broadly, intentionally so, to implicate a large variety of drug and active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturers. Further, each individual drug or active ingredient requires its own individual risk management plan. Failure to comply with the risk management plan requirements will result in a non-compliance letter. Many interested stakeholders have argued that the FDA has overstepped the agency's statutory bounds in requiring manufacturers of active pharmaceutical ingredients, as well as prescription drug manufacturers, to submit risk management plans to avert drug shortages. There is the potential that this requirement could impose the very drug shortages it's designed to prevent. And instead of just targeting the products that are already at risk of drug shortage. The comments on the guidance document illustrated that some are interpreting Section 506 CJ of the Federal Food, Drug, and Cosmetics Act differently than the FDA. The major point of contention is the broad range of products and the detailed nature of the framework proposed in the draft guidance. The comments also brought to light the fact that the draft guidance document is at odds with the International Council for Harmonization's Q9 guideline on quality risk management with contradictory terminology and concepts. There is a fear that this could create confusion and inconsistencies as manufacturers of active pharmaceutical ingredients and prescription drug manufacturers may have to comply with contradictory guidelines. This may result in a very different finalized document, but it will be important to keep an eye on this to ensure compliance with the new Section 506 CJ of the FD&C Act.
And that concludes the topics that we had to present for you today. I will turn it back over to Heather to wrap things up.
Thank you to Kate and Zuhal. You had a terrific recap of our industry-related headlines. And I'm curious to see what the remaining of 22 and beyond has in store for us. This concludes our webinar.